Welcome to Plug Live Television. Good to see you all again. Today we're going to be talking about battery warranties and state of health diagnostics. And stay tuned to see how the discount code that's in the caption underneath this video could help you if you have an old or high mileage Tesla. But first, I'd like to introduce you to Alex Johns, Partnership Lead at Altelium.
Hi, Euan. Thank you very much for having me.
Good to see you. Of course, we've known each other for a few years, both milling around EV circles, but you've been very busy with diagnostics, haven't you? State of health diagnostics for a wide range of electric vehicles. But of course, we're going to be focusing mostly on Teslas today. So on that note, I've got an old school Model S. It's done 136,000 miles now. It's 9.5 years old. It's definitely out of warranty. But it's obviously not the only one in the UK that's out of warranty at the moment. So what are those warranty limits on the different makes and models that are out there?
Well, in the Tesla was incredibly generous at first with the early Model S's, that they gave unlimited mileage for 8 years, but all of those are now outside their 8 years. And some of them we've seen come through on different people's videos at 300,000 or 400,000 miles, and I ran a taxi fleet which we ran up to 300,000, and I've seen 2 of those again which are well over 400,000 now. So there's plenty of high mileage Teslas out there, some with the original battery and motors as well, amazingly. But in general, the S and the X are 8 years and 150,000 miles. And then the 3 and the Y, the long range versions, are 8 years, 120,000. And the others are 100,000 miles, again, at the 8 years. I think I've got those all right, but there's a few different variations. But yeah, battery warranties are pretty generous. You've got basically your 8 years, and that's fairly consistent across other makes and models as well. There are some exceptions, but that's not the end of the life of a vehicle. So, what do you do when you've got a vehicle that is 8 years old, or perhaps you've got to the mileage already as a high miler? You've got a very valuable vehicle that if the battery fails, that might cost as much as the value of the car overnight through no fault of your own. It just might happen. And that's kind of a scary place to be. So we've had a lot of inquiries about, can we do something about that, being battery specialists and warranty specialists. And now, well, we've had it to the trade for about a year. And now, as of yesterday, it's live direct to consumers at welovebatteries.com.
Superb. Good to see that actually happening, because yeah, it's been available to the trade for a little while, as you say, but super impressive to hear about the old school Model S's that have done in excess of 400,000 miles. And that, of course, is despite the fact that some of the early Teslas did have design flaws with some of the battery systems. Most of them obviously are fine, but 1 or 2 of them unfortunately did come up against some technical difficulties and had to have the pack replaced under warranty. But that said, obviously the Model 3 and the Model Y have very different pack designs to the Model S. So what is Tesla themselves saying about the rate of degradation of the Model 3, the Model Y, and the other Tesla models and their packs?
Yeah, so in their sustainability report, the latest one has figures for the 3 and the Y for the first time. The S and the X have been in for a couple of years. And so basically they run through and say at 200,000 miles, the S and the X have degraded 12%, and the 3 and the Y have degraded 15%. You need to sort of unpick that a little bit and think, okay, what's going on here? So firstly, if you think of, in very simple terms, average mileage to be about 10,000 miles, well, clearly there are no 20-year-old Teslas. So these are all high mileage vehicles. And we know at Altelium, because we've tested lots and lots and lots of Teslas, that they're more sensitive to age than mileage. So high mileage ones will show less degradation than standard mileage ones on a per annum basis. Sorry. So I think in both cases that we're going to see that figure goes up quite a lot. My own feeling is that when it gets to average mileage at 200,000 miles, so about a 20-year-old vehicle, we'll be looking at vehicles which have degraded between 20 and 25%, give or take, as an average. and then obviously some variation on that. On the 3 and the Y, their long range ones I think will be a little higher than that, but their LFP ones will be lower than that because they have much higher cycle life. But it's yet to be known really, because not many of them are very old, as to the effect of the age, the calendar aging on the LFPs. But we are already seeing, as the number of tests build up on the 3s and the Ys, that they are degrading a little faster than the S and the X.
Something else that's been discussed previously about the use of LFP in Tesla standard range EVs is, yes, the cycle life is improved, but the range is reduced. So when you look at the cycle life of their long range NMC or NCA vehicles versus the LFP that has a shorter range but longer cycle life, there's a possibility it could almost cancel each other out, isn't it?
But, I don't think that's going to get quite that far, because the cycle life is so much higher. I mean, it's at least double. Whereas the range is maybe sort of 25% less. So I completely get what you're saying. One offsets the other, but it doesn't cancel it out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to completely cancel each other out would be
quite a lot.
Yeah, it would be quite a bit. LFP does seem to be a much longer lasting chemistry, to be fair. But no, it's interesting to see this feedback already. And of course, there's different pack designs within the Model 3 and the Model Y. The ones that we get here, if it's long range, it's definitely the 2170 cylindrical cell. But over in the US, there's a possibility that your Model Y might have 4680 cells. So there's some interesting studies from Recurrent Automotive. Have you seen that report where they were looking at Model 3 battery lifespan versus Model Y for vehicles that are routinely rapid charged versus rarely rapid charged? And what was interesting wasn't the fact that the amount of rapid charging that the vehicle doesn't seem to affect the rate of degradation. That rate of degradation seems to be fairly, as you say, kind of impervious to how the battery is treated. It was how long the battery was lasting in terms of calendar aging. And the Model Ys, which have these 4680 cells, seem to be showing an increased rate of degradation over a certain period of time than the 2170 Model 3s. So it'll be interesting, obviously with Altelium looking at state of health worldwide to see how that pans out, I suppose.
It's all going to work its way through. We haven't seen any 4680s on this side of the pond yet. And of course, most of those ones Recurrent would have been the first generation 4680s. And now I think they're moving from the second to the third generation. And most of the talk in the press has been around the cost, and they're getting down to sort of towards cost parity with the 2170, which is incredibly impressive for both a new entrant and a new design. It is interesting how it's panning out. The 2170 seems to be a pretty good cell, but they have allowed faster charging. But you were referring to that sort of fast charging thing that on the calendar aging. Absolutely. But I think you have to remember that Tesla are probably the leader at thermal management and the software which runs it, as well as the octovalve and all the clever stuff that goes on in the younger vehicles. And their thermal management massively offsets the impact of fast charging, because it's not the speed of the electricity flowing, if you like, that's the issue. It's the heat that's generated. And so if you can deal with that heat, then you can kind of go for it and run at some quite high C rates or kilowatt rates, whichever way you want to express it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they are up there in terms of how they look after their cells. And on that note, how does Tesla's rate of degradation, state of health degradation, compare to other makes and models of EVs that you've seen so far?
Well, we very much take it as the yardstick. It's the best as a whole make, and there are others which aren't far behind. So sort of Hyundai and Kia are pretty good. But they're well ahead of the VWs and the rest of that group, and they're even further ahead of the Stellantis group. So yeah, we're really impressed with the Teslas, which is why on the extended warranties, which we'll come on to in a bit, we'll go out to 4 years extension on a Tesla, but only 3 on everything else. So we kind of give it the benefit of the doubt.
Well, there we go. Yeah, I think that's a ringing endorsement for Tesla's battery design, and duly noted on those other makes and models you mentioned in terms of a future shopping list. There's a couple that I'll be writing notes in red pen about how to avoid, and I would hope that their CEOs do play catch up, so that everybody can benefit from how a well looked after battery can result in a very long lived car. But speaking of the rate of degradation, we've seen something of a ski slope, haven't we, on the data? So you might, if you've taken delivery of a new EV and have a look at the state of health after a couple of years, you might think, oh no, this is a horrible trajectory, but it's not necessarily, is it? It seems to kind of level off after an initial dip. Is that right?
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. It's a sort of ski slope thing, but it's quite early. It's done really. It's rarely not done by the end of the first year. Usually done in the first 6 months. Slightly depends on how much you're using it and so on. But yes, you do expect it to be a bit steeper in the first year, and then to go to a relatively stable sort of gradient over the years that follow. And as you get to an older car, I mean, you can basically sort of average it out and in a reasonable sense, and you hardly notice that first year. But interestingly, going back to those those Tesla sustainability reports, if you actually look at the graph, and it's not particularly helpful to look at in the sense that it's quite the scale's not great, but as I was saying, they run it out to 200,000 miles, so they're looking at a lot of high mileage ones. So if you sort of zoom back and think, well, what would be the average age Tesla? The average age Tesla, because of their production and everything else, I'm guessing, and it is only a guess, say it's about 5 years old or something like that, possibly less, 4 years old. And so look at the gradient in that first bit, and it's a little bit steeper, which is why if you then project that through, that probably comes through that 20 to 25 years, which I reckon that when the mature ones get to 20 years old, to 200,000 miles, that's where we'll be, give or take.
Good shout. And coming back to the differences in chemistry as well, we've already discussed LFP that's being used by standard range Model 3s and Ys and the anticipated increase in lifespan. But there's a couple of interesting chemistries on the very near horizon, which could potentially impact that rate of state of health degradation. So I'd be keen to get your thoughts on, first of all, LMFP, and then secondly, silicon anodes, before, as the electrochemist in the room, I inevitably mansplain over the rest of that. So yes, let's start with LMFP, and then I'll add in my 2 cents and see if we match.
Your mansplaining will be most welcome, because I'm not an electrochemist, but I've learned a few things as I've gone along in over 4 years in this now. So the LMFP, so that's got extra manganese in it, which is great. Because it's not a particularly expensive element, so it's not sticking in cobalt, and you're not going to have sort of children mining it in Africa, so that's good. And if to a certain extent it's almost replacing the need for the cobalt, although obviously we're looking at a completely different chemistry, then that's great. It's going to have, we think, fairly close to the cycle life of LFP, so you won't necessarily be compromising much on that, but hopefully getting much further towards the increased energy density of the NMCs and the NCAs. So it could be really interesting. What the unintended consequences are that as they play through, we're not sure. We know that CATL are making these. CATL, a fantastic battery producer, incredibly reliable. So a great partner for Tesla. There is talk. I think at this stage, I haven't heard it confirmed officially, but there is talk. Are Tesla going to make an LFP or an LMFP 4680, which would be interesting. Be very interesting. And yeah, it's going to be, hopefully it's going to be quite good. I've certainly sort of got my eye out now. I'm thinking sort of Model Y LMFP with a bit more range than the standard version, but a really long cycle life, because I tend to keep my cars a long time. That could be quite interesting.
Yeah, when it gets to the stage where, it's the things that make it a car rather than an EV that determine when you get rid of it. The suspension starting to go on you and things like that. Too many rattles and creaks because it's been battered by Britain's pothole-filled roads. That's when you know that the longevity of the battery is exceptional. And in fairness, we're starting to see that with some of the higher mileage Teslas today. The battery's still fine. But no, yeah, you raise a good point about the lifespan of LMFP. So basically, yeah, you've not added manganese. You've swapped out some of the iron in lithium iron phosphate for manganese, about 60% of it actually.
Okay.
And what LFP's Achilles heel is its energy density, and that's because LFP as a cathode material has a low potential. So the voltage of the cell is the difference in potential, the potential difference between the positive anode, the positive cathode material and the negative anode material. And the cathode, as I said, is LFP. If that potential is lower than NMC or NCA, then it means that your potential difference is lower, your voltage is lower. And bearing in mind that your energy is your capacity in ampere hours multiplied by voltage, you end up with less. So that's a nice little bit of mansplaining of why LFP's energy density is lower than NMC. But with
I'll pause and rewind that a few more times afterwards.
Yeah. I'll inevitably throw up an infographic about how it works just to try and make it more digestible for everyone who's watching. And if you're listening in the car or something like that, then yeah, can't help you there, mate. You're just going to have to try and visualize it a few times. But anyway, the point is that LMFP, that the addition of manganese boosts its potential up to pretty much the same as NMC, which means that you're boosting the energy density again, which also has the added bonus of needing less of what's already a very cheap bunch of materials and comparatively sustainable bunch of materials to give the car the same range that it had before. But where it gets interesting is people say LMFP is going to have the same lifespan as as LFP because they think, it's related to LFP. I think that its cycle life might be a bit less, not like massively less, but a bit less than LFP. And part of the reason that LFP's cycle life is so high is because the potential is so low that it avoids a degradation mechanism where the electrolyte, that liquid that's in there that allows the lithium ions to go between the electrodes, positive and negative, it doesn't start to degrade against the LFP cathode when it's fully charged. In other words, when it's at its highest potential. But when it's NMC or NCA, as they charge to a higher potential, that potential crosses this threshold at which the electrolytes that we commonly use today starts to very slowly degrade, which is why it's recommended that your NMC long-range electric car shouldn't be left at 100% state of charge for weeks or months on end. If you're going to use it the next day, fine. But if you're going to leave it for ages, then don't. So leave it at nearer 80%, whereas LFP, they say you can fully charge as much as you want.
Interesting one that one of our earlier contributors to Altelium did a PhD around this, and in fact found that 80 wasn't much better than 100, leaving it there. It's after that it then drops down, and so for longer term storage of any battery, they say basically store it below in the bottom half as low as possible. But of course you've got to look out for a bit of phantom discharge and things like that. So if you're leaving it, say you're leaving your car at the airport while you're going off on holiday for a month, if you leave it at 20% and there's phantom discharge, you might find yourself in a bit of a pickle. So I would tend to say leave it at 40 to 50, but I don't think many people actually do that because when they get off their plane or whatever, they want to get home. They don't want to immediately have to go and charge. So there's usability issues. So maybe LFP or LMFP may be better for somebody who wants to leave a car at a pretty high state of charge.
Well, true. LMFP, it's going to have that higher cathode potential. It'll be interesting to see how that lends itself to cycle life or state of health degradation. Is it going to increase it because the potential is that bit higher? But if you treat it sensibly, you'll get a good life out of it.
There is another reason why with LFPs that they say to take them back to 100% is because it's actually incredibly hard to read the state of charge on an LFP. It's in a sort of measurement sense, it's really tricky. And so what happened with some early LFP buses, I think in Chile, that the various cells and modules got so far out of balance that the battery management system suddenly noticed that they're a bit
Yeah.
wonky, and just made the bus stop. And it seemed like a perfectly all right battery. It seemed like it had got plenty of charge, but they just stopped, and that was all to do with the balance. So that's another reason why they recommend, okay, take everything back to 100%, because at least you know they're all balanced at the same place, and do that pretty regularly. So yeah, it's, to be honest, it also kind of makes sense intuitively of how people use vehicles. If I go to a petrol station, do I fill up my diesel tank to sort of 80% or 70%? No, I don't. I just fill it up and get on with my life. So I do think LFP and LMFP are going to become more and more common. I do think it's going to affect those overall Tesla scores, because I think they've already said that that Model 3 and Model Y are at least 50% LFP already, because I think 50% of their models that are selling a standard range. So yeah, it's going to be really important. And the likes of BYD, they're 100% LFP on their BYD Blade battery. So I think that the big boys and the mainstream are gradually going to these cheaper forms, which actually might work quite well for the consumer on many levels.
Yeah, oh yeah, we're definitely seeing that LFP still has a cost advantage over NMC per kilowatt hour, but it's not as pronounced an advantage as it was only a year or two ago, because the cost of raw materials has plummeted recently. But
Yeah.
that will inevitably, that market will rebalance towards the end of the decade. Those prices are predicted to rise. And that's where LFP and LMFP will have significant cost advantages. So anyone adopting those chemistries now is financially savvy, because they will have basically weatherproofed their prices against the market turbulence that's coming in. But another chemistry I want to quickly discuss is silicon anodes, which do promise in some cases a doubling of energy density, both gravimetric and volumetric. So in other words, per weight or per amount of space, how much you can shoehorn into a vehicle. But it's a bit of a yo-yo dieter, is your silicon anode, isn't it? So tell us more.
Well, the anodes to date have been graphite, so you sort of layers of graphene, and they will expand and contract a tiny bit as they're charged and discharged, as they get hotter and colder and so on. But it's very small. They're incredibly stable, sensibly priced. It's been a really good product to use, but the energy density is not. It's good, but it's not great. Whereas if you get some silicon in there, the energy density can go right up. But as you said, it'll expand and contract really quite a lot. So is that going to cause structural difficulties inside your battery? Is it going to then have short circuits or just burst or whatever, or even worse, catch fire and so on? So this is why it hasn't happened in a hurry. It's why it's taken a long time to develop. There have been lots of tests for quite a long time, very promising ones, but it has to work out in the wild, where there are massive fluctuations. The same car is made, which is going to be used in Death Valley in the States, which is 50 degrees plus, but equally a lot of them get sent to Norway, where it's pretty cold up the north. So it's a huge variation that these vehicles are made on. Now, Tesla are really good at their at quite a lot of things, but at their software and their thermal management. And so if they can do two things, one is make sure that it expands and contracts a bit less anyway, and then two, really carefully manage the temperatures that it operates in, such that it doesn't get stressed too much, then I think there's some real potential there.
Part of the problem is purely mechanical expansion with silicon anodes, as the anode is being charged and it's taking on lots of lithium ions. One silicon atom can hold 4 lithium ions, whereas with graphite you need 6 carbon atoms to hold 1 lithium ion in place. So it's something like a tenfold increase in energy density at the anode level, but by the time you've put the rest of the cell and the battery around it, it's a doubling of your energy density, which is still pretty impressive. But as you've alluded to, that mechanical expansion and contraction means that it just breaks itself apart, and then you lose capacity and the cell dies quite quickly. But we have seen some hybrid anodes. Since the mid 2010s, actually, there have been some big manufacturers who've been producing predominantly graphite anode cells, but they've got a sprinkling of silicon in there to boost the energy density by, say, 10%. They'll have a small amount of silicon in there. But there was some amazing work by About Energy, who are an incredibly talented bunch, who also look into battery modeling. And they've had a look at some of these silicon anode cells, and or not pure silicon anode, but sort of graphite with a bit of silicon in there. They've collated some studies on this as well. Basically, long story short, because they are two very different materials, they don't necessarily work with each other. So for most of the discharge of that cell from full, it's the graphite anode that's taking part in this, and the silicon anodes, or the silicon component of it, is just sitting there. And then right towards the kind of lower state of charge, the silicon suddenly wakes up, and it's all to do with the potentials at which it wants to start donating its lithium ions. And it goes, oh, all right, are we doing this? Okay, cool. And it starts providing its lithium ions. But then the two electrodes are kind of looking at each other. It's like, well, do you want some of mine? Do you want some of my lithium ions? It's like, no. Well, you're meant to be giving it to the cathode. You're not meant to be giving it to each other. So you just end up with this utterly incompetent odd couple, and it just doesn't work out. Plus the silicon, for the reason that I mentioned before, dies quicker than the graphite does. So yes, you do have an extended range battery. It's effectively got its own silicon range extender in there. But just like some of the range extender batteries that have been proposed, where it's a super high energy density chemistry in conjunction with something like LFP, you don't want to use the range extender. You only want to use that in emergencies. So you don't actually want to fully discharge that cell, or even take it to a reasonably low state of charge, because that's when the silicon range extender kicks in. So interestingly, some cell manufacturers have gone back to pure graphite to improve the cycle life, because you just had this sudden drop off in range because of the sudden degradation in state of health caused by this component of silicon not behaving itself. But we are seeing some really interesting companies out there developing pure silicon anodes and pure silicon anode cells, which do genuinely seem to hold up to scrutiny. The cycle life is getting better. The stability is getting better. So watch this space. Hopefully it won't be too long before we see them in EVs. But for people who've been watching this video,
yes,
we promised we'd mention, if you have a high mileage Tesla or an old Tesla that's out of warranty, how can you look after it? So they've eaten their greens, they've had their electrochemistry lesson. It's now time for the dessert. So if it's if you've got an old school Tesla or a high mileage Tesla, and you want the peace of mind of what the state of health of the battery is, how can you go about that?
It's pretty straightforward. You can either go off and find someone in the trade who can help you with it. But we realized that, a bit like Tesla realized 14 years ago, that actually consumers are quite happy to deal direct. So we go now direct to the consumer at welovebatteries.com, and you can go on and apply and get your vehicle tested. So you just need its registration. And then it'll prompt you to put in your Tesla login credentials. And what that allows us to do is monitor your battery via Tesla. We're an approved Tesla supplier. And so we can see the battery getting discharged as you drive it, or just sitting doing nothing. And then the next time you charge it, for a continuous charge of 25% or more, so it mustn't be a broken charge. So if you've got it on one of those solar tariffs or something where it just cuts in and cuts out, just turn it off so it just goes through continuously. But then that generates a report. So it's a really good report. It's very, very user friendly, and which I'll come on to a bit more in a minute. But basically, it's generated off that charge event. Now, for a consumer at home, you're going to charge your car once or twice a week anyway. So the intention is that it's not really any trouble for you. It's probably less than a minute of your time to log in, and then it'll be done when you next charge it. So you get your report, and that gives you a really good view of your state of health. So that's your state of health capacity, not the state of health resistance, which really no one looks at, but it is. And if we're talking electrochemistry, we'll just mention it in passing. So yes, it compares your current capacity against your original capacity, and that gives you your state of health.
Again, from an electrochemical perspective, there are some people who might try and obtain the state of health from an instantaneous snapshot of the cell voltages and so on, and that would tell you if there's some serious imbalance between the cell voltages, which is an indication that something's not right and the pack needs servicing. But in terms of the actual state of health capacity that you mentioned of the battery pack today versus when it was new, that's where you can't just do that with that snapshot. You need to do something with the battery to perturb it somehow, charge it, discharge it, drive it, charge it. And that's where, this definitely checks out. Because if you want to be super accurate about the state of health of any battery, you need to, this is speaking as an electrochemist, you need to drop it out of the vehicle.
Yep.
You need to hook it up to a cell cycler or a battery cycler. There's not many of them kicking about. You need to charge it at a constant current, constant temperature.
Yeah.
Hold it for a bit, discharge it again, constant current, constant temperature, count coulombs out. And ain't no one got time for that. So and
also it's probably going to cost, if you look at all your sort of all-in costing of doing that and equipment and blah blah blah, you're probably talking a few £1,000s every car. So we came out of a project which included Lancaster University, where they had a bat lab which did all that sort of thing. And we realized, okay, that's actually not that. It's great to know, but how can we make that then as applicable as possible to a sort of practical application? And so we've gone a very long way the other way to make it as just sort of, your logins a minute or two, and then your actual charge, you haven't got to do anything special. It's just next time you have a charge, you'll get a result. And then the actual result is a very user-friendly, and I'm sure you'll be able to flash one up on the screen, a very user-friendly report, which has got a lot of images on it. So it's got a picture of a battery with a percentage on it, and guess what? That's your state of health there, and that is very specific to your vehicle. It's not an aggregate over all the Teslas out there. It's your vehicle. But next to that, you've then got a thing saying basically your battery health comparison, which is saying, okay, for the same make, model, variant, age, and mileage, is that normal, above average, below average? And so that's just really a good context builder, because not many people have much context. I regularly test somebody's car and say, oh yeah, you've got a 94% state of health, and they go, great, is it? They just don't know. We have no context. This is a relatively new thing to most people.
True. And it's good that you've got not just the relative state of health comparison against the rest of the fleet, of which you've already got quite a lot on your books from the sounds of it, for comparative purposes. So basically to use that old Tesla catchphrase, it's within spec, or not, as the case might be, but also the fact that there's the absolute state of health determination diagnostics. So it's actually looking at your vehicle in isolation. And it's not comforting you by going, well, most of them that age are at that state anyway. No, this is actually telling you outright, this is the actual state of health of your car.
In a commercial sense as well, we have no vested interest in changing it. So if you were trying to sell a vehicle, you'd probably try and tell somebody their state of health was as high as possible. If you're trying to buy one, you'd say it's as low as possible. We don't buy or sell vehicles. We just test their batteries and do extended warranties, and so that accuracy and independence is very important to us, because it helps us to assess the risk on each vehicle.
And crucially, as I was alluding to earlier about how accurate do you need a state of health test to be, I explained the kind of extreme scientific way of doing it, and I explained the too crude a way of doing it, which is the instantaneous kind of snapshot, of what the CAN bus is telling you, reading the cell voltages off the battery management system. The most pragmatic solution is somewhere in the middle, and the way that you've come up with that is really clever from a time-saving perspective, because it doesn't require me as an EV driver or as an EV technician or mechanic to physically hook something up to a computer and spend a good few minutes or hours working on it. It literally just does it in the background, using a big body of data that you're getting directly off the car. So yeah, that's why I just think it's such a smart idea.
Thank you very much. Well, it's taken a lot to develop over time, and we've even in the last sort of year or so realized that particular route is ideal for the consumer, and we can do that with Teslas now, but we will add on all the other makes and models, basically any of them that are connected enough to talk to us as we go along. But we also have a trade model. Now, the trade doesn't particularly want to spend the time charging a vehicle or driving a vehicle, because time means money, it means somebody's doing something and so on. And so we have a little OBD test where we just plug it in and read the information off the vehicle. Again, you just said each one has its costs and benefits. That is very, very quick, very, very easy. But is it quite as good as a charge test? Probably not quite as good, but it's pretty good.
Yeah. So I would agree that having that greater sort of breadth of data, greater longevity of data, I suppose, is useful. And the annoying thing at the moment with electric vehicles is that they seem to have a bit of short-term memory loss. So if you try and plug some sort of diagnostics device into the CAN bus, as it's called, for anyone who's not technically minded, and ask it, so have you got all of the telemetry, all of the data from the past however many thousand miles worth of driving? It's going to go, sorry, what? No, I can only tell you the here and now.
The data differences between makes and models are just massive as well. And so, we kind of create one unified report, which is comparable across different makes and models and adjusted and so on. But it's kind of like a swan. That's all beautiful and serene on the surface and looks quite easy. But underneath, we're doing all sorts of different things for different vehicles and so on, just to make sure that all the data ends up in a sort of unified place of quality and comparability.
Oh yeah, I don't envy the team who developed that, because it's hard. You are dealing with so many different protocols, so many different languages under the bonnet, depending on the manufacturer. In fact, we've seen in particular with Tesla that part of the reason they're so good with their software is because they do all of their hardware and software in-house. Whereas if you look at the likes of, I think it was GM or Ford, were saying this themselves, like the reason why we've not been as good at it is because we buy this chip from here, that component from there. They speak different languages. We have to try and sort of do a Duolingo thing to get them to kind of work together. And then there's a software component that goes on top of that and goes, right, how do we work this? Whereas Tesla is all speaking the same language because it was all developed by the same team. So, but yeah, from the point of view of the various different languages effectively or formats of that data that are being spat out at you by different makes and models of vehicle, it's not trivial. So it's impressive that you've extended beyond Teslas, but of course Tesla is the focus of today's discussion. So if and this of course, as I said, I promised the listeners dessert on this. So if you're sitting there with a high mileage Tesla or an old Tesla and you want to, or indeed a fairly young one, and you're just curious and you want to know what the state of health of your pack is, what would that cost then?
Yeah, if you wanted a single test, it's £30, including the VAT, so it's just 30. But we thought actually some people really love their Teslas and hold on to them for a long time. So let's look at a couple of other packages, so that if you wanted unlimited testing for a year, so if you wanted to see what it does through that year or whatever, that we'll just do that for £60, so the equivalent to 2 tests. But you can do as many as you like. And then if you want to go to the sort of full extreme, say, okay, I'd like to have unlimited testing for the ownership of this particular vehicle, then we'll charge you £99 for that.
That's available worldwide, isn't it, that one?
The tests are available worldwide.
Yeah.
In the UK, we'll just pick up all your details off the registration on the normal, reg. Anywhere else in the world, you'll need to put in your VIN in the same place, but it's all in the instructions. Have fun, because it's really quite the first time you find out a really good independent view of your state of health. And the reports, I didn't say, but on the bottom part of the report, there's a really good breakdown of your range. and your range is a realistic range. It's not WLTP or
Mm.
EPA. People are quite surprised. They go, well, actually, that's about right. I've never seen anyone actually tell me something that's true about my range. And we separated out so you can see where it was originally and then where it is now. You can see how much has been lost to your bit of degradation. And we break that down by hot weather, cold weather, highway and city driving. So interestingly, on highway driving in the cold, it's half of warm weather driving in the city. So it might be 150 miles in the cold on the highway, but 300 miles in the warm in the city.
That's interesting, actually. Yeah, because you look at the likes of EV Database, who've got their kind of predicted ranges as well, and they as you've alluded to, they split it out by the type of driving and the type of weather. So good to see that Altelium has been crunching the numbers on that one as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
great stuff. So actually, yeah, you're saying about obviously this being available to everyone worldwide. Out of curiosity for everyone listening in, if you go ahead and buy this and you're not from the UK, please leave in the comments where you are from. I want to see who's the furthest away,
That would be good.
who's availed of this service. I'd be quite intrigued by that. But should you do a state of health test, and should you find that the battery, or in fact, even if you haven't done the state of health test, should you find that your Tesla battery has given up on you or is in the process of giving up, what options are available to someone with a Duff Tesla battery? How can they get that repaired or replaced?
Well, there's sort of two answers to that. One is how you physically get it done, and two is who pays for it. So if and then the third dimension is it still in Tesla warranty or not. So if you're still in Tesla warranty, you'd probably go to Tesla because you want them to pick up the bill, and they would diagnose it and work out what to do. And their warranty basically covers you for what is called reinstatement basis, which when we talk about ours, we also do, which is basically saying we'll make it back to where it should be or better, depending on what's available, because there aren't necessarily that many second-hand appropriate batteries available which can be used, whether that's at the module level or the whole pack or whatever. So there is that. Bear in mind the battery isn't just the cells, modules, and pack. It's also obviously the cables, the BMS, the cooling system, and then you start getting into the powertrain, which is also covered under our extended warranties. So you've got your electric motors, you've got your inverters, you've got your high voltage cabling, your DC-DC converter, your charge connectors, all that sort of stuff. So basically all the important stuff which goes on sort of mechanically and electromechanically under the vehicle.
Fair point. And if it's out of warranty, if it's completely, Tesla's not going to want to touch that, and you don't have an extended warranty in place, there are some repair options available in the UK now, aren't there, for trying to kind of rejuvenate the pack as best as possible, not just through a Tesla dealership, but there's third parties who've become a dab hand at this.
Yeah, and we recognize those. So if you're out of warranty, basically get a warranty, because it can be really expensive if they go wrong. And you really don't want to have a situation where you've got an 8-year-old Model S or something. It's probably worth 18 to 20,000 pounds at the moment. And it goes wrong, and it might cost 18 to 20,000 or even a little bit more to fix, if they have to replace the battery. So it's a big risk, and it can happen overnight through no fault of your own. It just gives up. So it's worth considering, or strongly considering, an extended warranty. Now we offer extended warranties on the battery and the powertrain as described, if your battery is above an 85% state of health. So basically you need to go through our test. We only recognize our own tests. And through the same website, and through welovebatteries.com with your referral link, and then we can offer you 1, 2, 3 or 4 year extended warranties depending on the age of your vehicle. All our warranties top out at 12 years or 200,000 miles. So even if you had some time left, or you thought you had more, you should be okay, but actually you use the miles, they all stop there. But that's a pretty generous mileage, and the age getting out to 12 years is quite an old car. So and also by then your whole car is a much lower value. It's going to have halved again, so it'll be under £10,000, probably £7,000 or £8,000. So if you get a complete failure at that point, it's kind of not quite so bad as if you get a complete failure up in near the £20,000 mark.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, but if you look at the standard battery warranties that are out there, yes, the older Model S did have an unlimited mileage warranty, but it was only 8 years. I think the most generous warranties I've seen from new EVs recently have been 10 years, and I think it's 125,000 miles. That's generally as good as you're going to get. So the fact that you're going up to 200,000 miles and well over a decade is definitely good peace of mind for a machine that in theory should just run and run. So with
the other thing we've done on the cover is that we've kind of done what Tesla did in much more accurately. So we're covering both electromechanical failures, which is the insurance jargon for it stopped, a sudden unexpected failure. And also we're covering the degradation. So if it drops below the 70% threshold, the same one that Tesla has, then a repair can be requested again. So it's a good coverage.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I'm fully aware I'm currently being photobombed by the sun, so I'm just going to. It's a slight unusual problem to have in Scotland, having too much sunlight. There we go. So I'll just adjust the light there, shall we? But yeah, so in terms of what is actually covered by the Altelium warranty, you've said that there's the ability to kind of adjust the pack, repair the pack on a couple of occasions. So presumably that includes your parts and labour. There'll be an excess on that, I would imagine, just as with any typical insurance warranty. Any details on that?
Yeah, so the maximum potential payout is £25,000. So it's safe for Teslas. There are other makes and models that if we get to them, we might have to look at going further because some of them are more expensive. But that's more than enough to take care of battery and powertrain on a Model S or a Model X. So there is an excess of £250. And it's a reinstatement basis, just like Tesla. So we're not saying new for old, but we are saying we'll make it good or make it right or better. I think that sort of describes most of the sort of features of the cover. It's probably worth saying that it is a warranty, so it isn't something that is going to cover you in the event of an accident. That's what your insurance is for, rather than your warranty. They're different products, and it's always worth remembering that basic difference.
Yeah, that was a good point. My next question was going to be, what if I get a bit throttle happy, wrap it round a tree, and go, "Oh, look at what I did! Can you fix that?" So yeah, that's very much one for your insurance company. Good to know. But yeah, should the pack expire of its own doing, then it's good to know that you've got that coverage in place. And as you mentioned, we need to make sure that an Altelium state of health test has been done on the pack, so that the warranty claim can be.
And if you do buy the warranty, then the test, the inception test, and then the annual tests, we like to keep a check on it as you go through your various years. They're all free. They're included in the price.
Oh, amazing! There we go. Even better. So
and the prices before your 10% discount start, I think it's £680, including the VAT for 1 year, and then basically in 1 year increments from that. I can't remember all of them exactly, so it'll be just under 1,400 for 2 years and so on. And yeah, I've slightly, I know it's a different type of coverage, but you take out insurance on the possibility that your house burns down. Pretty low probability, but if it does, you really don't want to pick up the bill for it. And this is a bit like that. Do you want a potentially sort of £20,000 bill, or are you willing to pay nearly £700 each year for something that you've got to pay, but then you've taken away the stress of the really big risk? And that's really the choice, and it depends where your appetite for risk lies. But we have been asked by a lot of people that, please, can you do something about this? So we have.
Yeah, I'm genuinely impressed by the popularity of your warranty. I was one of the first people to get one of the the
Yep.
Altelium Tesla warranties for my old school Model S. But I fall into that category of old school Tesla owner where we'll run it into the ground. We are tight gits though, and I spoke to some other old school Tesla owners I know who are also tight gits. And I said to them, "Oh, by the way, have you heard about this extended warranty? It's under 700 quid a year." And their response was, "Oh, really? Oh, how do I sign up?" So like that took me by surprise. And of course, down
Well, if they're
south,
tight gets,
there's been a lot
hopefully
of
they've
demand as well.
waited to get your 10% discount
Well,
referral code, and then they'll be really happy.
that's a very good point, actually. So yeah, the referral code, of course, we were saying it was about 680 to 700 pounds roughly. 10% would be taken off of that, and that includes your state of health tests in there as well. From what you're saying,
Correct.
that is superb. So yeah, that's how you can use the discount code to get yourself a bargain. That's am I right in saying that the warranties are only for the UK at the moment? Plans to go international at some point, I would imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So hopefully, probably into Europe next, and then America, and then rest of the world. The issue, as much as anything, is making sure that you've got the really reliable repair networks so that they can fix it when something goes wrong.
That makes sense, actually. Yeah. So it's yeah, there is a valid reason for not extending it out that far at the moment. But yeah, conveniently, Europe and the US are both chock full of third-party engineers who are a dab hand with Tesla modules and packs. So I would imagine it won't be too long
Won't
before
be
we
too
start
long.
to see that. Yeah, yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
chomping at the bit. I'd like to, I don't think we'll be offering it inside China, but I'd like to get the rest of the world as soon as possible.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Yeah, very much looking forward to seeing that being rolled out. And yeah, from what you've said, and from what I've seen as well, there's already good demand for this in the UK. But if you've not bought the warranty yet and you fancy saving 10% off of it, then yeah, as we've mentioned umpteen times, the discount code is in the caption underneath. And yeah, if you're wanting to find out more, it's welovebatteries.com, isn't it?
That's right. And if you apply through the website, there'll then be another place to put in a referral code in there because it doesn't pick up your original one. Your original referral code will take you straight to the purchasing platform. But by all means, go and have a look at the website first. Makes complete sense. But don't forget, you want your discount, so put in your code.
Superb. Yeah, good shout. Thank you for that. And yeah, thank you for running us through everything that Altelium's up to at the moment. Because as I say, I've got my very old school Tesla sitting on the driveway. For what it's worth, the battery, touch wood, is still fine. The motor is still fine. But as you've alluded to, having seen the quotes that Tesla give to repair those components versus the value of the car, it's a sensible warranty. It's a no-brainer. And I know people who are even tighter than me who are in the process of signing up, and that is the litmus test. So yeah,
Yeah.
amongst the other generation of old school Tesla owners who are just, proud of their machines, they could have easily upgraded to a new left-hand import Model S, complete with drive-through grab handle. What an absolute liberty that was, by the way, when Elon was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, you'll be fine driving on the wrong side of the road." They could easily have afforded one of them, but they just love their old school Model S. They've probably called it Nigel or something like that, and they just find out about this warranty and think, "Oh, fantastic! Yeah, I'll definitely go for that. It makes sense." So yeah, regardless of your demographic, it seems to have won over older and high mileage Tesla owners. So congratulations on that. And again, the way you've gone about the state of health diagnostics, having seen a few different ways of doing it, I would say this is the height of pragmatism and practicality and validity as well. So yeah, nice work. I'm looking forward to seeing what Altelium achieves in the future, not least with the plethora of different makes and models of EV that you're inevitably going to have to accommodate at some point. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us, Alex, and thank you for listening in to what I'd initially thought would only be about 15 minutes. But if you're still listening here, well done. You've found out what your discount code is as well, so that was worth the wait. And we'll hopefully see you again soon for another episode of Plug Life Television.